1955, a generous donation from a friend of the Maryland Ornithological Society laid the foundation for the organization's Sanctuary Fund. Since then, the MOS has obtained several properties with the intention of preserving diverse habitats for Maryland's birds. Whether used as safe places to nest in the summer, stopover sites for migrating birds, or homes for year-round residents, our sanctuaries continue to play an important role in the lives of birds. Today, we'll look not only at the sanctuaries themselves, but at the history of how they came to be and the future and what they could become.
So Dominic's beautiful video, I hope, whetted your appetite to hear more about our MOS sanctuaries. This is a map of our state showing our 10 sanctuaries. Notice that all of the dots are in red except for one, which is Adventure. Adventure is a little bit different, which is why it has a blue dot, and I'll talk about how it's different. But you can see the sanctuaries span the state from Cary Run and Caroline Wilson in the far west in Garrett County, down to Irish Grove, down in Somerset County. And let's see, yeah, I can use my pointer there to point to Irish Grove. We're going to take a journey across the state and visit each sanctuary in turn. And first, I just wanted to show you a list of the names of the sanctuaries, the counties they're located in, and an indication of their size. You can see that the size varies from the smallest one here in Anne Arundel County, Mandary's Creek, which is only 8 acres, all the way up to the giant Irish Grove, which is 1,610 acres. That's the one down in Somerset. And then in between, we have everything from 14 acres up through the 50s and 86 acres. So there's a lot of variation in size, and as you'll see, in habitat as well. This totals up to over 2,200 acres that are protected across the state in our sanctuary system. And the video showed you this photo. This is from Maryland BirdLife, and it shows the first check, the handing of that check to the president of MOS at the time in order to start the Sanctuary Fund. MOS did not actually own a sanctuary at this time. This was in 1955 when Mr. John Besson donated $500 to kick off the start of the Sanctuary Fund of MOS. Mr. Besson actually lived here in Anne Arundel County. I can't remember the name of his property, but he had a property on the waterfront, and he and his sister Adele entertained birders at their property quite a bit, although interestingly, they never apparently joined MOS or the Anne Arundel Bird Club, but they were friends of many birders, and Mr. Besson decided to donate money in memory of his twin sister Adele, who had passed away. Just a month after this check was handed to MOS, Mr. Besson himself passed away, and in fact, he's not pictured in this photo. He was too ill to come to the donation ceremony. But it's interesting that this particular incident is tied up very much with the history of MOS. This happened in 1955. It is not a coincidence that also in 1955, MOS became incorporated. MOS had been founded 10 years prior in 1945, but had never gone through the legal paperwork needed to become an actual corporation, a nonprofit corporation of the state. But through a third party, MOS leadership heard that Mr. Besson was considering making a donation, but they also heard that he was not willing to donate if the organization was not incorporated. So they ran out, they got a lawyer, they got the paperwork done and became incorporated, and as you can see, Mr. Besson donated the money. So at that point, the MOS chapters started looking for a sanctuary. They didn't have one. And it's interesting that when you read these old Maryland BirdLife articles about the start of the sanctuary system, everybody agreed that MOS wanted sanctuaries, but there wasn't anything written, really, not formally, about why MOS wanted a sanctuary system until Chan Robbins jumped in, and he wrote an editorial. He was at the time, of course, and was for very many years, the editor of Maryland BirdLife. And in 1960, he wrote an editorial why do we have the sanctuaries. At this time, MOS had just acquired its first sanctuary, and I don't usually like to read from a PowerPoint slide, but I think Chan's words are so important that I'm going to take the time to read what he had to say. And it's a much longer editorial, but I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. He said, "We now have a fine secluded tract on which to relax and enjoy the world about us, a tract to which we can retreat from the noise and smells of the city. We have unpolluted streams in which we can study animals that once were more widely distributed throughout our state. We can conduct group projects and carry on individual studies on a great variety of birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, or insects. We can have family outings and club field trips. But more than this, we have an opportunity at very modest cost to the society to provide educational facilities not only for our own membership, but also for the Maryland public. The hobby from which we derive so much enjoyment can be converted into a tool for sowing the seeds of conservation, so that more of Maryland's citizens will learn to appreciate the natural areas of our state, and in turn, help to preserve more of these areas for the enjoyment of future generations. This is our great challenge." So in those two paragraphs, Chan really laid out the framework for what the MOS sanctuaries were to be. He and others in the society really envisioned the sanctuaries as places that would be busy with people as well as with birds. They weren't to be just set aside and forgotten. They were really meant to be enjoyed by all of us and to be used for, as Chan pointed out in the second paragraph, to be used for the education of the forthcoming generations. So, without further ado, let's start our trip through the sanctuaries. The first sanctuary was Rock Run. This was established in 1960, and it functioned as an MOS sanctuary up until 1976. It was located in Harford County. It's no longer an MOS sanctuary, and we'll learn about why that was. But as you can see from this old photo, there was a house on the property, and the property was a total of 57 acres. This was leased from a private landowner for the princely sum of $10 a month. MOS didn't even own this place, but it was leased, and they poured a lot of effort into running this as a sanctuary. This map shows the location of the sanctuary in what is now part of Susquehanna State Park on the Susquehanna River on the very eastern border of Harford County. So, Rock Run was a busy place. The Harford chapter of MOS immediately started having meetings there. That house was 4 floors, and one of the first things that they did, the Harford chapter gathered furniture to furnish the house. There was a system for distributing the keys so that members could come in and use it. They established a library there. It was a very busy place. They had regular picnics there. All of the MOS chapters sponsored field trips there, as well as outside organizations as well, things like scouts and school classrooms and so on. Bird banding was carried out there. There was a winter bird feeding program. One thing I wanted to say, throughout the talk, I'm going to be switching back and forth between the old times and the current times. It's going to be looking at history and also looking at our current situation with the sanctuary. So I hope you stay with me as I kind of go through this time warp. Winter bird feeding is one thing that amused me when I read the old Maryland BirdLife articles, because whenever MOS acquired a sanctuary, the first thing that people started doing was feeding birds. They would bring bird feeders out and establish a bird feeding program throughout the winter at each sanctuary, and that was true also at Rock Run. Sometimes these sanctuaries were so remote that getting there in the winter required a lot of effort to get there through the snow, but people did it because they saw this as a very important activity. And at one of the sanctuaries, and right now I'm not remembering if it was Rock Run or Cary Run, which we'll talk about in a minute, they had a bird feeder custom built that held 100 pounds of bird seed. It was a giant. They also kept track of the birds that were seen at the sanctuary, created a bird list for Rock Run. They built trails and marked them. There were, actual trail signs out on the ground. There were maps made of the trail system. Chan Robbins and his family laid out a study grid for ecological bird studies on the sanctuary grounds, and nature education camps were held there. So you can see right at Rock Run, pretty much everything that Chan envisioned for the sanctuaries was carried out. It was a really lively place. And here are some photos taken from old Maryland bird lives of what Rock Run looked like. There was, in addition to the house, there was an outdoor shelter that was used for picnics. There's one of the famous bird feeders up there. And a bench. The bench was actually a memorial to a deceased member, and it had a plaque on it and so on. So why don't we have Rock Run anymore? There were a number of issues at Rock Run. Primarily, the big thing was repeated vandalism to the house. There were squatters that lived there for a while. There were repeated fires in the house, lots and lots of just plain old out vandalism and bad behavior. The landlord, Mr. Paul, died in 1973, and at that point the state of Maryland acquired the land and it became part of Susquehanna State Park. But MOS continued to lease 1 acre that included the house until early in 1976. But the death knell of Rock Run was really the fact that there was a very serious fire that was set in the house early in 1976, and it rendered the house unusable. So at that point, MOS relinquished the lease. However, fortune smiled on MOS, and just 1 month after the Rock Run fire early in 1976, MOS learned that it had received a bequest from Dr. Carolyn Tumsuden, who worked at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. She was a physiologist, and she had lived in Harford County, was a member of the Hartford Bird Club. When she passed away, she left her house on 1.5 acres to MOS. And one thing that was very nice about her property is that it was adjoining the Hartford Glen Nature Education Center. Hartford Glen is owned by the Hartford County Board of Education, and it's used for teacher training, but also for camps and outdoor experiences for children in the elementary schools in Hartford County. So MOS acquired this property, and the Hartford Bird Club and MOS moved in, and just like Rock Run, Tumsuden, as it was known, became a very, very busy place as an MOS sanctuary. MOS continued to operate Tumsuden as a sanctuary until 1994, and then unfortunately some of the same issues that had plagued Rock Run set in with Tumsuden, so it didn't continue. But here's a map showing where Tumsuden was located. The Susquehanna River is up here. Here's I-95. Bel Air is here, and here is Hartford Glen. The marker shows the location of Tumsuden House adjacent to Hartford Glen. So as I said, there was a lot going on at Tumsuden that mimicked some of the activities at Rock Run. Nature education programs, winter bird feeding, that was a must, chapter meetings and field trips, bird banding. Bird banding, by the way, at Hartford Glen is still conducted by members of the Hartford Bird Club, so that was the start of it. During the first Breeding Bird Atlas, the coordinator, Rick Blum, was offered housing at Tumsuden, and he lived there for the duration of the Atlas project. And then because of the problems that were starting to set in at Tumsuden, the Hartford Bird Club recommended to MOS that MOS release Tumsuden, and so it was transferred to Hartford Glen in 1994. I could not find any early photos of what Tumsuden looked like when it was actually run as an MOS sanctuary, but Gene Scarpula was out there last week and he took this photo of the house for me. So that's what the Tumsuden house looks like today. It is still owned by Hartford Glen Education Center, and apparently they do not use it except for storage. There are no activities occurring there. So now we move over to Western Maryland, to the very first MOS sanctuary that was purchased by MOS, and that's Cary Run. This is a cover photo from Maryland BirdLife in December of 1962. I suspect a lot of you have seen this photo. It was taken by Anderson Martin in 1962. One thing that's interesting about the acquisition of Cary Run is how fast they moved in those days. I think they found Cary Run in September, and by November, MOS owned it. So things moved along quite quickly. Cary Run was purchased after many, many years of searching for suitable land for a sanctuary by MOS members throughout the state. There was a dedicated network of people who were searching for available property for MOS to buy, and this was the first acquisition. So this is what Cary Run looked like in 1962, and 55 years later, this is a photo I took in spring, in May, when Jean and I visited in conjunction with the MOS conference that was out in Garrett County. So if I just go back real quick, notice the trees, and notice the trees. One very visible change. So this house has served us well. The house is over 130 years old now, but it's still going strong. And I know in particular Liz Nusafara really has a soft spot for Cary Run House. Here's the location of Cary Run. This is Garrett County, showing Cary Run up toward I-68, not quite up toward the Pennsylvania line, but up in the northeastern part of Garrett County. We'll talk about this other sanctuary in a few minutes. So when MOS discovered Cary Run, it was an abandoned farm that was 52 acres that included the house and a number of outbuildings. And as I mentioned, MOS made the purchase in the fall of 1962. The price was $4,000, and that money was raised by MOS within the space of a few months. They went all out to raise the money very quickly to secure the transfer of the property. Every MOS chapter at the time made a donation, and of course many individual members made donations as well. So here are some other, here's another comparison set of photos. The Cary Run entrance road in 1962 compared to what it looks like now. Here's a field and woods view. Again, that's pretty much the same, taken from the same space then and now. Cary Run has a very interesting history. The southern border of the property is actually the old Braddock Road, which was important in American history. It was used by General Braddock during the French and Indian War to move his troops farther westward. And there is now a nature trail laid out along the old Braddock Road. One of our members' son he laid out this trail as a scout project, and it is marked with commemorative markers, interpretive markers that tell not only about the natural history of the Cary Run Sanctuary, but also the American history of its use by the Indians and by the troops during the French and Indian War. So very interesting trail to visit. The house at Cary Run was built in 1887 from white pine that was actually cut on the property. And it was a working farm prior to its acquisition by MOS. They grew potatoes, oats, corn, and strawberries there, and there was an orchard. But eventually the farmers decided that they could not farm anymore because the winters were just too severe. It was really hard to keep the farm going in the wintertime. And in fact, the last farmer who owned it had a full-time job in the city. He couldn't make a living on the farm itself. Now, in addition to the 52 acres that were acquired in 1962, MOS purchased an additional 110 acres in 1973. So currently, Cary Run is 162 acres. The purchase price of this larger property was $40,000, 10 times the price of the original acquisition. Half of that was mortgaged, and half of it was paid in cash using funds that MOS had tucked away in the sanctuary fund. But MOS started conducting very vigorous fundraising to retire the mortgage, and they were able to do so in 3 years. So, and this chapter, by the way, was one of the chapters that held relentless fundraising activities. Diane mentioned the wildlife lecture in the spring. Originally, that lecture was for the benefit of the Sanctuary Fund, and there were other activities that were carried out for the benefit of the Sanctuary Fund by this chapter and other chapters. So Cary Run sits at an elevation of 2,500 feet. Cary Run itself is a stream that flows through the property, and there are other tributary streams as well. Cary Run itself is a tributary of the Savage River. There's also a freshwater pond on the property that was formed by damming one of the streams. The freshwater pond is across the driveway from the house. There are a number of old fields that we try to mow them once annually. We're not always successful in doing that, but we're trying to maintain the habitat in the fields for sparrows and other grassland breeders. There's a beautiful hemlock woods at Cary Run, also white pine and Douglas fir, and there's quite an extensive deciduous woodland as well, including wild cherry as a dominant tree. And then near the lawn, near the house, there's an extensive lawned area that's used for picnicking and such. This is a then and now photo of part of the pond. And here are some old photos from Maryland Bird Life showing some of the activities that Cary run in the old days. You can see picnicking on the lawn in front of the house. There's filling, one of those bird feeders in the wintertime. That's what that person's doing. And then this is a scout troop that earned scouting certificates through their activities at Cary Run. The original trails at Cary Run were laid out by Boy and Girl Scouts, and the little signs that are out there were made by scout troops as well. The scouts really did quite a lot of work for MOS at Cary Run. So we still have an annual spring work day at Cary Run. The Allegheny chapter has held an annual picnic there. I actually don't know if they still do that, but that was their practice for many, many years. Winter bird feeding, of course, had to be done. Nest boxes for bluebirds and other cavity nesters. Research projects have been carried out there, particularly on the cavity nesting birds. A junior nature camp was held there in the old days, and Chuck Hager, who is an MOS member, still holds a nature camp there. It has not been every summer, but he did hold it this summer, and I believe there's plans for next summer as well. Many, many university ornithology classes, ecology classes have visited there from Frostburg University as well as other higher education institutions. Elementary school classes have visited, and there have been adult birding weekends. This is a trail map that shows the very rich trail system on the original part of the property surrounding the house. The house is here, and you can see there's a network of trails that emanate all along this original portion of the property, the original 52 acres. The old Braddock Road is here. And this shows a couple of clips of titles of some of the research studies that were published after research being conducted on the cavity nesters. Bill Devlin, who's at Frostburg State University, has been studying bluebirds and other cavity nesters at Cary Run for over 40 years. And when Jean and I were out there visiting, we ran into one of his students who was out there checking bluebird boxes. So it's still ongoing. During the Breeding Bird Atlas, there were 121 breeding species that were identified in the Atlas block in which Cary Run resides. And I'm not going to read you the list, but you can see there's some very nice birds indeed, including ruffed grouse, bobolinks. There's a backfield section that adjoins a neighboring farm that hosts bobolinks almost every year. And some more scenes of Cary Run. Cary Run is a really special sanctuary for MOS because it contains such a wide variety of habitats. You can go there and see a really diverse assortment of birds because of the habitats that we have on the property. This marker, by the way, is for the old Braddock Trail, the nature trail that runs along there, the old Braddock Road. Now also, while you're out in Garrett County, you can stop in and pay a visit at Caroline Wilson Sanctuary. I have to say, Cary Run, as you saw from the list of activities, has been well used over the many, many years that MOS has owned it. Caroline Wilson, not so much. It's hard to find people who have ever visited. How many of you have ever visited Caroline Wilson? We've got 3. How many of you have never heard of Caroline Wilson before? Yeah, me neither. Until I started doing the research, I was sort of dimly aware there was something out there. I had no idea how to get there or how to find it, but we did the research and we got there. It's a lovely place. It's 86 acres that was acquired by MOS in 1988. It was actually donated to the Nature Conservancy by the family of Caroline Wilson. And the Nature Conservancy, you know, they have a strict policy that they only keep properties that harbor rare, threatened, and endangered species. And this one did not fit the bill. So they approached MOS and asked if MOS was interested, and MOS took it. The Wilson family, by the way, is still in the area. In fact, the nearest little habitation, the little village nearby, is named Wilson. So this was a prominent family in the area. The sanctuary property is actually the wooded stream valley of the Little Youghiogheny River, which flows through the property, sort of from northeast to southwest. And when they say Little Youghiogheny, they really mean little. It's really just a stream. River is a highfalutin name for that little stream. This property is surrounded by farms and a few residential lots. So this is the property, kind of wedge-shaped, I guess you'd call it. This arch-shaped thing is not a road. Those are railroad tracks. Caroline Wilson Sanctuary is landlocked. It does not have frontage on any road. But the way that you can get in is by driving down this road and driving into where the railroad tracks are, parking by the railroad tracks, and then walking the tracks down to the sanctuary. And from there, you can pick up an old road which runs along this border of the sanctuary. There's also some side trails that go off into other parts of the sanctuary. And this is the valley of the Little Youghiogheny River here. There's a marshland, a freshwater marsh, down in the southern part of the sanctuary. And you can see there's farms all around. So these are some views from when Jean and I visited in May. These are the railroad tracks that we walked in on. This is actually looking down into the sanctuary from the railroad track embankment. The embankment is raised, and you're looking down quite a steep slope down into the sanctuary. This again is a view from up on the embankment looking down in. And this is, I don't know if you can see the water in this photo, but there's water down there. That's the stream. That's the Little Youghiogheny. And you're looking straight down the stream valley along the length of the sanctuary here. Here's some photos from actually down in the sanctuary along that road that I had marked in orange on the map. You can see that once you get down in there after exiting from the railroad tracks, it's pretty easy walking. Now when Jean and I visited, and there's Jean, walking down the trail. When we visited in May, we had the impression that this road is being kept open by deer hunters. Our property is not open to deer hunting, but we do not patrol it. And so we think it's being used by deer hunters. A nice thing is that we didn't see any damage caused by them. They're keeping the road open. They're keeping the place accessible to us. They're taking out the deer, which of course browse the understory. So I think they're actually doing us a favor. And here's some more scenes. There's a bit of hemlock woods in the sanctuary. Quite a nice place. As I was walking back here, kind of in this area, I flushed up what I think was a broadwing from a nest. And I don't know if you can see in this photo, there's a little face peering out at us from the woods. That's a possum that Jean and I scared up. So it's a very peaceful place. The Breeding Bird Atlas found 80 species breeding in this area, again including ruffed grouse, broadwing hawk, which I think I flushed one up. Alder flycatcher is another nice bird. American kestrels use the surrounding farm fields. So very nice sanctuary, very quiet. So we're pretty much traveling to the MOS sanctuaries in our talk tonight from west to east. So the next sanctuary that we hit in our eastward trek is Seymour Cooper Sanctuary, which is located in Frederick County. And it's way up by the Pennsylvania state line, as you can see. It's a tiny one. It's only 14 acres. It's located near Catoctin Mountain Park, which is a National Park Service property. It's only 3 miles from Camp David. So they tell me, the Frederick Bird Club members tell me that when the president is in residence at Camp David, our sanctuary may be inaccessible because they block off some of the roads. This was another sanctuary that we received from the Nature Conservancy, this one in 1978. It was given by Mrs. Seymour Cooper as a memorial to her husband. And this sanctuary is entirely wooded. There are no trails, but the understory is quite open, so it's very easy to walk through it. So here is an overhead satellite view. Here's the sanctuary. It's kind of a wedge-shaped piece of property fronting along Eilers Valley Road. There are private residences to either side. And, you know, there's very easy parking right on the road. You just park your car and walk in, and the entire sanctuary is pretty much accessible from the road. This green here in the bottom of the slide is an artifact of the satellite image. They apparently stitched together images taken at different seasons. There's no such line when you go up there. Here are some views. These are photos that I took when we visited in June. And you can see, again, the pretty open understory. We do have the area posted for no trespassing, that it's a wildlife sanctuary. There's also a sign an identification sign for the sanctuary, but this sign is not really visible from the road. In fact, it's back there in this photo on the left. It's set well back, and that's because of vandalism. There had been a sign closer to the road, and it became target practice for the local yahoos with guns. So they built a new sign and set it back quite a bit. So it identifies, but it doesn't attract attention. Here's some more views. There is, although there's not a trail per se, there is this remnant of what I think is an old logging road. This property had been logged prior to acquisition by MOS. You can see there's quite a few rocky outcrops on the land, a lot of ferns, not much understory elsewise. Catoctin Mountain Park, I've looked at management plans for Catoctin Mountain Park, which is literally just down the road, and they have a significant deer problem, and I suspect we do as well here at Seymour Cooper. And that's our little group there standing on the road looking into the sanctuary. The habitat at Seymour Cooper is good for migrating warblers and thrushes. The breeding bird atlas found 82 species in this area, and they're birds that you would typically find in this high Catoctin Mountain environment, including, again, broad-winged hawk. Some warblers, scarlet tanager. We heard scarlet tanager while we were there. Moving on, we come to the outlier, the blue dot on our sanctuary map, and that is Adventure Sanctuary, also known as Adventure Conservation Park. So how this property came to be is that it was in private ownership up through the 1960s, owned by a family called the Hostetlers. Alice Hostetler was the last surviving member of the family, and she was very interested in nature study. She decided to leave her property to be used as a nature study center, but she didn't really know how to do that. So she approached her neighbor, who was Margaret Donald, who happened to be an MOS member. And Margaret Donald brought Chan Robbins into the discussion with Alice Hostetler on how she could structure the use of her property to be a nature study center. So what she decided to do was to appoint a three-way trust, and that three-way trust exists to this day. The three partners in the trust are MOS, MNCPPC, which is the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, and Hood College. And it was her belief that with these three trustees in place, I say three trustees, but three organizations, but each organization was asked to appoint two trustees. So it was a circle of 6 trustees, 2 from each of the 3 organizations. And MOS's 2 trustees were Chandler Robbins and Margaret Donald. So it was her hope, Alice Hostetler's hope, that the trustees would supervise the establishment of a nature study center that would provide for the education of the younger generations. MNCP, I can never get the acronym right, that group, Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, they actually hold the deed. MOS does not hold the deed. And MNCPPC maintains the house and the grounds. They provide all the funding for its maintenance. And they also administer hundreds of nearby acres. So although Adventure itself is only 14 acres, it is surrounded literally by hundreds of acres of stream valley parks that are administered as nature areas. This is a photo from an old Maryland bird life in the 1960s, I think this was 1969, that shows Alice Hostetler's house at Adventure. She lived there until her death, and then after her death it became a nature center, and it is still today a nature center. The lawn sloping up to the house. This is a more recent photo in color provided by Gemma Radko, who did bird banding at Adventure. And here's a couple scenes again from an old Maryland bird life showing a person walking down into the stream valley, the wooded stream valley at Adventure. And here is a young person attending a nature camp at Adventure, and I don't know if you can see what that person's holding, but it's a saw-whet owl. And the person is sketching the saw-whet owl. So there's your little saw-whet owl, Diane. We were talking about this at dinner, that I had a photo of a saw-whet in the hand. These 2 photos were taken by Margaret Donald herself. These are photos of Adventure today, and these are actually taken from the Montgomery County Parks website. So you can see mix of fields and woods. They maintain it today as a nature study center. It's not a regular park, it's a nature center. And there was a significant bird banding operation at Adventure in the days when it really functioned as an active MOS sanctuary, which today it is no longer. But Margaret Donald herself conducted bird banding with support from the Montgomery chapter of MOS. She had a team of at least 11 banders and 26 assistants every year from 1972 until 1995, when she became too ill to continue. In that time, she banded over 100,000 birds. It was an incredible operation. It was both fall and spring banding, and it was an intensive 16-hour day for the entire migration season in both fall and spring. Incredible number of man-hours were put into that operation. Margaret Donald was also very intent upon the nature education mission of Adventure, and she entertained visitors at the bird banding station. In some years, there were over 1,000 visitors that came to see her do the banding. After Margaret stopped her banding operation, as I said, because of ill health, Gemma Radko, who was an MOS member from Montgomery County, she stepped in with a monitoring avian productivity and survivorship banding operation. And this is essentially a recapture program. We attempt to recapture birds that were banded in previous times. She had financial support from MOS through the MOS research program for this project, and she operated her MAP station for 9 years, from 2000 to 2008, during which time she banded over 600 birds of more than 60 species. This is a photo of Margaret Donald showing the banding operations to young people at Adventure. And here's a selection of photos that Gemma Radko provided for this talk, showing some of the birds that she banded during her operations there. And you can see there's a really nice selection. So, we don't talk about Adventure anymore at MOS, and why is that? It's now managed solely by MNC PPC. After Margaret Donald passed away, and after Gemma's project wrapped up, MOS gradually moved away from an active management role. And at this time, we have not appointed successors to our 2 trustees for this management. So I think that's something that the Sanctuary Committee will be addressing, whether we should resume an active role in the management of Adventure or not. On paper, MOS is still a trustee. And so I think that we do have some obligation to determine what our role will be in the future. But one thing about Adventure, even though it's no longer being operated as an MOS sanctuary per se, again, like Rock Run and Tumsuden and Carry Run, it really personified all of the things that Chan envisioned for what an MOS sanctuary could be, including that aspect of educating the younger generations. The newest sanctuary that MOS has acquired, I can still say that for a couple more months, is Piscataway. And do not confuse this with Piscataway Park, which is a national park on the Potomac River. This is Piscataway Sanctuary. It's like Piscataway National Park. It is located in Prince George's County. It's down in the southwestern part of the county, near the Potomac, but not on the Potomac. The Potomac's over here. And it is in the Piscataway Creek watershed, which drains into the Potomac River. It was donated to MOS by a developer in 2008. It is adjacent to the residential neighborhood that the developer developed at that time, and it consists of 82 acres, most of which is wooded. Here's a satellite image showing the Piscataway Sanctuary here. This is the residential community. We have 2 entrances to Piscataway. The main one is through the residential community at the end of Hardy Tavern Road, where we have a gate leading into a little parking lot. We have a pavilion there, and from there there's a trailhead that takes you down a hill, and then the trail continues through this stream valley. So this is, once you get down the hill, it's level walking through the stream valley, and I have some photos to show what it looks like. The other approach to Piscataway is from the south. The property immediately to the south of Piscataway Sanctuary is the Gardner Road Park, which is an MNC PPC property. It's managed in conjunction with Maryland DNR, who operates it for hunting during deer season. But apart from deer season, it's open to the public, all year round. And Gardner Road, which is a public road, comes up, and it comes up from the south. It terminates at Gardner Road Park. There's a little parking area right here, and from there you can take what is now a foot trail. It used to be an old farm road. You can take a foot trail through Gardner Road Park, and that foot trail continues into the MOS Piscataway Sanctuary. That first photo I showed where there was a sign on the left was actually taken right here at this boundary. That's where that sign exists. So this is the north side of Piscataway, adjacent to the residential neighborhood. Here's our little pavilion that's in the parking area. And then this shows some scenes down in the stream valley where the very wide trail goes through. Here's one of the streams. You can see some of the houses in the residential neighborhood in the background. I've visited Piscataway 2 or 3 times, and I know Dominic has been there as well. One thing that's really interesting to me, even though it's so adjacent to the residences, you don't see people back there, and you don't see trash. It's really been kept up pretty nicely. So we don't, crossing fingers, we don't have problems with our neighbors at Piscataway. It's a very peaceful sanctuary to visit. We did not own Piscataway during the last breeding bird atlas, but of course we atlased in that area because we atlased everything. So the block that contains Piscataway had 81 breeding species, and again, I'm not going to read them, but you can see what they are here. Wood duck is a nice one. It uses some of the ponds in the area as well as the streams. It's a good breeding bird for the area. Kentucky warbler is another good one. Some of the overgrown areas streamside are what Kentucky warbler like. And these are some photos from the south side of Piscataway. That is the approach from the Gardner Road Park. And as you can see, there's a really nice wide trail that makes easy walking back into our sanctuary. The trail eventually peters out. It does not join the other part of the trail that we have at Piscataway, but you know, Dominic and I have talked about how easy it would be to connect those trails to make a nice walking route. So we'll have some work being done on that, I think. Oh, then we come back to home base, Anne Arundel County. Remember, we're moving from west to east as we journey across the state here. The next sanctuary I want to talk about is Mandary's Creek Sanctuary here in Anne Arundel County. How many of you have been there? Not very many. No, I'm not surprised. I had not been there myself. I didn't even know it existed until I joined the Sanctuary Committee this spring. Dominic and I visited in April, I think it was, and that's when these photos were taken. Mandary's Creek is waterside on what is now called Maynadier. I can't say the word, Maynadier Creek. I know how it's supposed to sound, but I can't get it to come out right. As somebody mentioned when we were starting our meeting here tonight, a lot of it is overgrown with Phragmites. There are some cattails remaining, very few, but I found a couple cattails to take a picture of. There's a lot of skunk cabbage in the spring when we visited. In the intro video, I probably should have pointed it out at the time, but Dominic had some overhead footage of Mandary's Creek showing it's mainly Phragmites at this point. Here's a map showing the location of Mandary's Creek. Here's Route 50. Here's the Severn River. Here is a bay, and I don't know the names of all these, but here's Maynadier Creek. Round Bay, thank you. And Mandary's Creek is right on the western edge of this waterway.
No, River Road.
River Road, thank you. Yep, River Road goes right up along there. Unfortunately, it's not an easy sanctuary to visit. Here's a satellite image map. Here's Mandary's Creek, and this is all Phragmites. And then just along the road, this is River Road, there's a little strip of woodland. It's not an easy sanctuary to visit because we do not have parking available. Technically, you could park a car in dry weather along the road here. There's maybe a spot for one car, but I really don't recommend it because cars zip along River Road at a speed that is really not safe. I mean, I don't know where they think they're going at 80 miles an hour on River Road, but that's what they're doing. So we do have some suggestions for parking along to visit Mandary's Creek. If you're interested, we can share those. But this is it. And again, it's just 8 acres. What I wonder how many people in the room ever knew that there was a sanctuary in Anne Arundel County that preceded Mandary's Creek called Hancock's Resolution. Does anybody have a memory that goes back way that far? Yeah.
I know about
Okay. Hancock's resolution was another lease arrangement. The property, it's a colonial farm that actually exists today. You can visit it. But at the time it was owned by Historic Annapolis. I think now it's owned by the county. But at the time, the nonprofit Historic Annapolis owned it and offered it to MOS as a nature sanctuary on a trial basis. So MOS entered into a 2-year lease agreement, and sadly it did not work out. There are buildings on the property. At the time, the buildings were in ruins. It had been an abandoned farm for many, many years, and the buildings were absolutely not usable. But I know that there's very little written about this as a sanctuary, but I did learn that the Anne Arundel Bird Club very stalwartly pitched in and started laying out trails and keeping a bird list for the property and so on. But this property suffered from the same kinds of problems that Rock Run and Tumsuden encountered, and that was vandalism. And so the vandalism really made the property unmanageable, and MOS did not renew the lease after the original 2-year trial period. But at that point, former MOS President Colonel William Bodenstein was a member of Anne Arundel Bird Club. He lived here in the county, and he was inspired to donate his property to MOS. So that is how MOS acquired Mandary's Creek Sanctuary. I mentioned a minute ago it's just 8 acres, mostly marsh, mostly Phragmites. There's just that little strip of woods along the road. But this land is significant because it is the only marsh habitat that MOS owns on the western shore of the bay. There aren't any trails, but at least in the strip along the road, it's fairly easy walking because there's really very little understory. These are some photos that I took when Dominic and I visited in April, and that is Dominic on that fallen log. He's trying to get a better view of the frag marsh there. One thing that I discovered in doing research for this talk is that although Mandary's Creek Sanctuary is little, it benefits because of some nearby conserved lands. So the Solon Forest Legacy easement is 292 acres located here, not very far away from Mandary's Creek up here. This is in private ownership, but it is protected in perpetuity by a conservation easement. And then also nearby is Brewers Pond Natural Area, which is owned by the county park system, and that's about 50 acres. They may eventually develop this property to provide waterfront access to the public in this area. But, you know, both of these conserved lands do synergize with the property that we have at Mandary's Creek to provide habitat for birds.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does that say Harold Harbor Road up along the top there?
Yes, it does. That's Harold Harbor Road.
Thank you.
Yep. The Breeding Bird Atlas found 80 species in this area, and I'm not going to read them again, but you can see many of these are water-oriented birds, not surprisingly, given the habitat there. And while we were visiting, Dominic snapped this beautiful shot of a red-headed woodpecker. I believe this is the closest I have ever been to a living red-headed woodpecker. It was no more than 10 feet from us on the top of this very low snag. So Dominic snapped off a shot. So some nice birds, even though the property's tiny. There's also private property in woodland immediately across the River Road on the west side of River Road. Now that's privately owned. It's not under conservation easement at this time. But while we were there, we could see birds flying back and forth all the time. So there's other habitats in nearby lands that the birds are using. So continuing on our journey, we now go across the Bay Bridge here to the eastern shore, where MOS owns 3 properties in what I guess you would call the upper or mid-eastern shore. Myrtle Simon Pilo, which is in Caroline County, Mill Creek and Marengo Woods are both in Talbot County, and we'll visit Mill Creek first. Mill Creek is actually the second sanctuary that MOS purchased. It was 108 acres that were originally acquired by MOS in 1964, but it quickly grew. In 1965, an additional tract of land was donated to MOS by Mrs. Royce Spring in memory of her husband. That is known as the Spring Tract at Mill Creek Sanctuary. And then MOS itself purchased a little bit of additional acres in 1965 and in 1971. So we now have 156 acres at Mill Creek Sanctuary. This property, although large, it's almost the size of Cary Run, is much more homogeneous in its habitat. than Cary Run is. It's pretty much all deciduous, a little bit of pine woods, no fields, in the Mill Creek Valley, Mill Stream, Mill Creek. This is the cover of Maryland BirdLife from back in 1962, a hand-drawn cover of Maryland BirdLife that celebrates the acquisition of Mill Creek Sanctuary. And then this is a hand-drawn trail map that was in an article that appeared in the interior of that issue. MOS as a whole was so excited when this sanctuary was acquired. You can practically see the excitement jumping off the pages of Maryland BirdLife. This very lively hand-drawn illustration, it has a little sign that says a Bird and Wildlife Sanctuary for Talbot County. It shows some of the trails, some little illustrations showing the wildlife there. And people were just so excited that this was acquired by MOS. One of the first things that the Talbot County chapter did was to build a very, very nice shelter with a brick fireplace, and immediately started hosting youth groups there. And this is, in fact, a group of young people that were enjoying an outing here in the shelter with the fireplace. I don't know if you can see in the bottom of this photo, there's a young person that is tree hugging this very large specimen tree at Mill Creek. And to this day, there are some very large trees at Mill Creek. The land is quite boggy, and so that saved quite a lot of it from being logged. So there's some really beautiful old growth trees in there. Mill Creek Sanctuary, I have to say, I think it is one of the sanctuaries that we know the most about, at least in theory, because in 1984 there was an extensive biological survey that was conducted there by Talbot County member Jan Reese, working with Paul Noel, Laurel Brown, and Jeff Effinger. They visited Mill Creek every 2 weeks for 14 months, and they documented every living thing that they found. They produced an 82-page report, Jan Reese was the lead author, that has complete lists of fungi, vascular plants, invertebrates, fish, amphibia, reptiles, mammals, and birds. The list of vascular plants alone is over 400 species, and I think that there's a similar number of fungi. It's just an incredible scientific work that they produced. In addition to the species documentation, there is also a historical and cultural summary of the property, talking about its previous use, geology, topography, hydrology, soils. I mean, it is a complete compendium. It's now out of date. The report was written in 1985, and no such survey has been conducted since then, but it provides an incredible baseline for Mill Creek Sanctuary that we do not have equaled at any other sanctuary, which is why I say we know the most about Mill Creek Sanctuary. This shows an outing of the Talbot Bird Club, and I don't know if that was a work day or an actual field trip that they had at the sanctuary, but they're standing on a bridge that they built over one of the creeks in the property. Here's a very nice identification sign, some views of the land at Mill Creek, and these photos were taken by Danny Poet, who's a member of both Caroline Bird Club and Talbot Bird Club. So activities at Mill Creek include ongoing work days. A most recent work day, I know Barbara has some photos from this, involved people going out and posting new property markers along the property lines. This property was recently surveyed. We hired a professional surveyor to survey the boundaries at Mill Creek, and so property boundary markers were put up earlier this fall, or was it late summer? Summer.
Midsummer.
Midsummer, okay.
Hottest
Time
time of year,
moves
I think.
on. The Talbot Bird Club also still holds regular events there, including field trips, picnics, and breakfast hikes. They have a very charming tradition there where they'll go on a hike, not necessarily at Mill Creek, it might be at another place, but they'll do a bird walk, and then they gather at Mill Creek for a breakfast at that little covered pavilion. These are some photos taken by Wayne Bell of various scenes at the sanctuary. This is the actual Mill Creek or Mill Stream as it flows through the property. You can see there's quite a wide floodplain. We have a bench, a seating area near the parking area at Mill Creek. Mill Creek is easy to visit. We have an actual parking area set aside, and there's also ample parking along the road. Another scene of the stream valley, and here's an exterior view of the shelter that contains that fireplace. Breeding bird species in the area includes 69 species listed here. And again, I'll just give you a second to peruse them. I'm not going to read them. But they're birds that you would expect to see in a rural habitat. Mill Creek Sanctuary is surrounded by farmland as well as smaller residential lots, mixed woods with the residential lots. But I think the list of birds is pretty typical for that kind of scenery. And some final shots at Mill Creek. Mill Creek is known for its beautiful wildflowers, and so springtime is a nice time to visit. Moving on. Oh, no, before we move on, I wanted to give you a heads up that if you are inspired to visit Mill Creek, be aware that it's closed for deer management until January 31st, so don't go there now. We don't want any accidents. Moving on now, we'll go to the southern part of Talbot County to Marengo Woods Sanctuary. And while we're looking at the map, I just wanted to point out, it's kind of hard to see because the contrast on this map isn't that great, but this is the Miles River, and Marengo Woods sits on a neck of that river. It is on a peninsula that's surrounded by water on three sides, so it's quite a nice location. And this is a view of, I guess you might call it the entrance to Marengo Woods. Marengo Woods, it's a corner lot, and this is the corner. You can see that there's a rock here with a bronze plaque on it. Now, I have a close-up of the plaque that I'll show you in a couple photos. This photo was taken by Wayne Bell in the spring, and you can see the understory contains dogwood. It's quite a pretty picture there at the corner. I said entrance in quotes because there are no trails at Marengo Woods, but it's pretty easy to walk in, actually. So here's Marengo Woods. It's this odd-shaped piece of property on the corner of Marengo Road and Gregory Road. And that plaque that I showed you is sitting right here at this corner. Marengo Woods is one of those sanctuaries that is somewhat challenging to visit because we don't have parking. And so you have to be a little bit inventive to find some parking. There is somewhat of a trail, more like a break in the trees on the southern boundary, and you could park one car there. But otherwise, there are ditches along the road, and so you can't park. There's just no shoulder to pull over on. So it does take some ingenuity to visit Marengo Woods. As you can see, it's surrounded primarily by farmland, some other forested tracts. All of these lands have been logged extensively over the years. Marengo Woods was logged before MOS acquired it. And in fact, it was donated to MOS by a group of landowners who wanted to preserve it from further logging. So it's 49 acres. Most of it is loblolly pine. There are some deciduous trees mixed in. One thing that really impressed me when I visited in midsummer was the scent of pine was overpowering. And you just can't get that in any of the other MOS sanctuaries. So I didn't want to leave because it was so peaceful to be in there, surrounded by the beautiful odor of the pine. I already mentioned it's surrounded by farm fields and other woodlots. And I mentioned that local landowners donated the land to preserve it. That was in 1989. There are no trails, but it is walkable because it's quite open in the understory, although it is wet much of the year. So in some years, it might not be possible to walk through the woods there, but when I visited in July, most of it was accessible. This is a close-up of the plaque, and you can see the landowners who donated the land are listed along with two people in whose memory it was donated, and these are Margaret Shortle and Herbert Austin. Breeding species in the area, these are from the last atlas, include wild turkey. Again, not too much of a surprise given the farmland surrounding. Eastern screech owl, great horned owl, woodpeckers. I saw a lot of woodpeckers when I was in there myself, and I think Dominic did as well. Heard woodpeckers, yep. Pine warblers, and brown-headed nuthatches. Here are some views inside the property. This is a black vulture who greeted me upon my arrival. Here's part of the wetland. There are no streams through Marengo Woods. It's perfectly flat. It is absolutely flat topography and no streams, but it's just a sponge type wetland. And you can see here's the open understory that makes for easy walking. This is a view, this is where I was saying you could park a car, where this trail comes out on the roadside on Marengo Road. So this is a view looking out into a farm field across the road, And this is a view looking in from that same point. So moving on, we come to the other Upper Eastern Shore Sanctuary, Myrtle Simon Pilo. And Myrtle Simon Pilo is known for its wildflowers. Here's a very nice view of native azalea blooming in the spring along the creek. So Myrtle Simon Pilo is in Caroline County, quite near the Delaware line. It's between the towns of Greensboro and Goldsboro, and quite a rural area. Not a whole lot going on in that area. Here is the sanctuary boundary. It's kind of dragon-shaped, at least it looks like a dragon to me. It's the stream valley of a stream called Gravelly Branch. It runs along here. Gravelly Branch itself is a tributary of the Choptank, which is up in this direction, not too far away. I think it would be possible, if I owned a kayak, which I do not, I would attempt to put in where the stream goes, oops, I lost my, there we go, where the stream goes under this road. I think you could put a kayak in there and kayak down to the Choptank, and you could also get up into the sanctuary. I think it would be possible. As you can see, this one is another one that's surrounded by farmland as well as some smaller residential lots, and it is a wooded oasis in this otherwise agricultural landscape. So how this sanctuary came to be, it was a donation. Mrs. Pilo, Myrtle Simon Pilo, died in 1971, and she herself lived in Ridgely on about an acre of land with a house. She left that property in Ridgely to MOS. And that property was not suitable for MOS use, so MOS sold it and used the $34,000 proceeds to buy what is now Pilo Sanctuary. It's approximately 55 wooded acres. The original deed lists 50 acres, but a more recent survey cites it as 55, so I'm calling it 55. And I already mentioned it's a stream valley of Gravelly Branch. And here's a trail map. The Caroline County Bird Club immediately adopted Myrtle Simon Pilo as their own. They've done quite a bit of work at Myrtle Simon Pilo to keep it clean, or attempting to keep it clean. It does have road frontage on Draper's Mill Road running along the western border here. Here's the stream. The Caroline Bird Club laid out two trails. They both start at the road. They do not join. It's not a loop trail. But one trail pretty much follows the northern boundary of the property. When I visited there in the summer, I could not find that trail. It has been grown over. But there is another trail that starts at the road on the south side of the property, and this one is marked with quite a large sign, and at least the first part of the trail is visible. It kind of peters out about here, but I was able to make my way back in pretty far. At one time, the Bird Club had a picnic area laid out here with some benches, but those benches have now disappeared. Oh, they're still there? You found them? Oh, Dominic found them. I couldn't find them, but he did. So here's the sign that's by the road. Here's the trail that starts. Here's the creek. And another view near this trail on the south side. And like Mill Creek Sanctuary, Pilo is known for its wildflowers. And in fact, in early days, the Caroline County Bird Club, one of their members compiled an extensive list of plants for Pilo. So breeding birds in the area include 80 species. Again, typical birds for this kind of rural type agricultural habitat. Prothonotary warbler is a nice one. The wet woods there would support that very nicely. And just leave you with some final scenes of Pilo. Here are members of the Caroline Bird Club. Here's Danny Poet again. And so we go on to Irish Grove, the big one, the big sanctuary that MOS owns. This is the house at Irish Grove. I do not know the year the house was built. Dottie, do you know?
I'm not sure. It was sometime in the 1800s.
Sometime in the 1800s.
Paul Weinstrack said it was 1887. Is that what he said when we were?
Something like that.
Yeah.
So it's about the same age as Cary Run.
At that time, the whole area was farmland.
Mm-hmm. So it's a beautiful house, and MOS has put a lot of effort into, Dottie herself has put a lot of effort into maintaining this house over the years. The location of Irish Grove is in the southernmost part of our state on the eastern shore. It's almost Virginia. This is the Virginia line. on the Delmarva Peninsula, and Irish Grove is here in Somerset County on Rumbly Point Road. It is the jewel in the crown of our sanctuary system. There's no other way to say it. It's 1,610 acres, predominantly salt marsh. Contains tidal streams, both fresh and saltwater ponds, loblolly pine woods, about 45 acres of open fields. So like Cary Run, there are diverse habitats there that are just not equaled at our other sanctuaries. The man-made structures include the house itself, as well as a screened picnic area, other outbuildings, observation platforms, trails, and bridges. And these scenes show some of those structures, actually. Here is the screened picnic area. There's Sue Riccardi having lunch at one of the work days. This was taken some years ago. These photos are by Doug Forsell. Here's one of the observation platforms. This one is dedicated to Jim Stas, who actually lived at Irish Grove for a couple of years and did quite a lot of work on the house when he was there. He also kept running lists, of course, of all the birds the birds he observed while he was there.
He'd have his morning coffee at that corner.
Oh, okay. That was his
That's why it's
morning
called his staff.
morning coffee corner for Jim. Here's our observation platform that looks out over the marsh. Here's the road that borders the property and one of the bridges on one of the trails. So, Irish Grove activities. Currently, we hold, as everybody knows, because we just heard, there was a working weekend the first weekend of November. That's an annual tradition. Dottie organizes those.
We have
Two. Chapter field trips have occurred there over the years. Almost, every chapter of MOS has visited. At least in the old days, I don't know how true this still is, but there were many, many visits paid by outside groups, including schools, garden clubs, ornithology classes, and more. Towson University used to take its ornithology classes there, from all that far away. So a lot of different organizations have made use of the property. Scientific research on barn owls was conducted there over several years. Also, there was a long-running project by David Lee on marshland sparrows. Gladys Cole conducted bird banding. Interestingly, for at least 2 years, there were camps that were held for Maryland science teachers. And that idea died out, but I think it's something worth investigating again. And Irish Grove still functions as the headquarters for the local Christmas count. So here's some scenes from not this year's workday, but a workday from some years past. I don't know what year this was. Here's Dottie. And I think this activity is conferring in the parking lot on what do we do next? Here's some tree planting, work on the roof. Here's some work being done on the observation platform.
That's Gladys. That
Oh.
observation is named after Gladys.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
The observation platform is named after Gladys Cole, who did the bird banding there all those years. And this map was produced by Paul Bystrack. The white trails can be driven. The pink trails are for foot traffic only. This is only a small part of the trail system adjacent to the house, which is here. And this junction right here is where Dottie Lane. So that's where Dottie Lane intersects Robbins Way. And that's Dominic here, Paul Bystrack, and Dottie herself from the work weekend this year. Here's some overhead views. Well, one of them's not overhead, but some views of Irish Grove taken by Doug Forsell. He went up in a plane to take these photos quite a few years ago. But you can see the vastness of Irish Grove as well as the beauty of the habitat. It's really a spectacular place, unequaled, by any other thing that we have. It is vast. This tax map shows the surrounding parcels, and our Irish Grove is shaded in blue. Paul Bystrack produced this map as well. Irish Grove, our holdings there themselves consist of 11 different parcels that were bought at different times, acquired at different times. But you can see how large it is compared to the surrounding properties. This is Rumbly Point Road. Here is where you go into the house. And the trail system, of course, is around there.
You didn't mention that one little
I'm coming to that. So Irish Grove has had a history of different acquisitions. It was the third sanctuary that MOS purchased in 1968. The original purchase consisted of 1,409 acres at a cost of $80,000, which was a huge sum for MOS to invest in, but having seen the property, and by the way, it wasn't called Irish Grove at first, it was called the Somerset Marsh. The Somerset Marsh Sanctuary. They didn't have a name for it, but finally settled on Irish Grove. But having seen it, the membership agreed that it just had to be bought. So half of that purchase price was mortgaged, and that mortgage, through an intense fundraising effort, was paid off within 3 years, just like the Cary Run mortgage was. It was an incredible job of fundraising that the early MOS members conducted. The house, the outbuildings, woods, and marsh were all on that first acquisition. And then additional acreage was purchased by MOS in 1971 and 2008. MOS received a gift of several parcels that totaled 148 acres. This was given by the Eastern Shore Land Trust in 1992. And then most recently, this is what Dottie was saying, but you didn't say. I'm coming to this. MOS just completed the purchase of a 32-acre in-holding at a cost of $40,000, so that our total acreage there is now 1,610. And this, if you look at the blue MOS Sanctuary, this white strip is what we used to call the in-holding. We now own it. And it is called the Chandler and Eleanor Robbins Tract at Irish Grove. These 3 photos are from the real estate website that offered this land for sale. It was in private ownership. It was used primarily for deer hunting, and it was a significant risk to our property. We learned that hunters were using this property as literally an inroad to our larger MOS sanctuary. They were coming in on ATVs to do deer hunting, and the ATVs were using the same route so consistently that it actually caused damage to the marsh that's visible on Google Earth images. So MOS, primarily through the efforts of Paul Bystrak, he was the one who discovered that this land was for sale, and he really recognized the strategic importance of bringing it into our sanctuary rather than having it be a risk to our sanctuary. So Paul brought it to the attention of the Sanctuary Committee, and over the summer, the Sanctuary Committee decided to approach the board for permission to buy it, and that approval was made at the September meeting. The purchase price was $40,000 plus legal costs. Half of that money came from a bequest that Chandler Robbins left to MOS when he passed away. And that's why we're naming the tract after him, as well as for the fact that Chandler himself, as well as his wife Eleanor, had a great love of Irish Grove. They spent a lot of time there. Paul Bystrak and Chan laid out the trail system at Irish Grove. So in honor of Chan and Eleanor, that new purchase is named after them. The other half of the purchase price money is coming from the Sanctuary Endowment Fund itself. Now, I have to do a little bit of business talk here. So MOS has money that is in investments. And there are several different funds within the investment pool. We have a fund for research projects. We have a fund for scholarships. We have a fund for education activities. And we have the Sanctuary Fund. Generally, the approach is that we do not spend the principal. We leave the principal invested, and we use the interest every year to pay for the ongoing activities. And for the sanctuaries, it's the maintenance costs of the sanctuaries. So we generally don't touch the principal, but we thought that buying this in-holding was so important that we actually made a withdrawal from the endowment fund. We need to replace that money because since the endowment fund is now depleted, the interest for next year will be reduced by that much, and we need that money to take care of our sanctuaries. So we're having a fundraising campaign to replace the money in the Sanctuary Endowment Fund. And if you have looked at the last Yellow Throat, you notice that there was a Sanctuary Fund donation form in the back of that. I brought some donation forms with me tonight. I do hope that you will give because it's really an important need, not just for Irish Grove, but for all of our sanctuaries to replace that money. It's what keeps us going. So birds at Irish Grove, as you might expect from the habitat, the birds are spectacular. These are photos, some of them taken by Dominic. The top right one is from Doug Forsell showing terns over the marsh. This is an archival photo that appeared on the cover of Maryland BirdLife in 1995. It was taken by Al Hari. It's black vultures actually on the roof of the house at Irish Grove. Great blackback gull, willet, red-winged blackbird, which is kind of an iconic bird that breeds in the marsh there. The breeding bird atlas found over 80 breeding species, as you might expect. Most of these are wetland oriented, including rails, clapper rail, Virginia rail. We do not believe that black rail breeds there anymore, but maybe if we do our job, it'll come back. Willets breed there, pine warblers, prairie warblers. It's really phenomenal, phenomenal habitat that they're not making anymore. These are two, I thought, beautiful photos by Paul Bystrack that show the tranquility and the beauty of Irish Grove. So with that, we say goodbye to Irish Grove and we go back to our map of the MOS sanctuaries. We've completed our journey from west to east, visiting all of the sanctuaries in turn. But as you know, I think from various announcements that we've made, through the generosity of the Robbins family, we're adding another dot to that map. So the Chandler and Eleanor Robbins Sanctuary at Red Run is our latest acquisition. This is a property that was owned by Chandler and Eleanor, and it's now passing to MOS. And we haven't completed the paperwork for this one yet. Dominic has been up to his ears in legal paperwork for the last couple of months. It has not been an easy process, but this property is coming into the MOS Sanctuary system. It is out in Garrett County. It's the green dot here on the map in far western Maryland, near Carrie Run and Caroline Wilson, way up near the Pennsylvania line. And here's a close-up showing more detail about its location. It's just north of I-68, near the town of Grantsville and Piney Grove. Piney Grove is just to the east. So it's a 45-acre property. It was purchased by Chan and Eleanor in March of 1967, and they purchased it because of its ecological value. They never intended to build a house there, and there is no house there. They simply wanted to preserve the habitat that was there. They recognized that it was really a unique piece of property. When Chan passed away this past spring, the property was inherited by the 4 Robbins children, and they came together this summer, discussed it among themselves, and decided that the right thing to do was to give the property to MOS. So we are just so indebted to them for their generosity. It's an amazing gift that they have given. The headwaters of Red Run is a stream that flows through this property, and the headwaters of Red Run are in Wolf Swamp, which might ring a bell with you if you're familiar with Western Maryland ecology. Wolf Swamp was previously a Nature Conservancy property that's now administered and owned by DNR. Wolf Swamp was transferred from the Nature Conservancy to DNR, and it is a relict of the last ice age, 15,000 years ago. It's a peat bog. So the birds, the animals, and the plants that are found in this area are really typically found much farther north. It's a community that was able to survive because of the high elevations there. When the last ice retreated to the north, these were left behind. So a DNR survey that was conducted in the 1980s and 1990s identified 2 rare species at Red Run, the property that MOS is starting to own. These are the two-spotted skipper, and that's the photo there, this little butterfly. It's a state endangered insect, and white-fruited mountain rice, which is a state-threatened plant. So the folks at DNR were actually ecstatic when they learned that MOS was acquiring this property. They can't take it themselves. DNR can't take it because it doesn't meet their guidelines, but they were really happy that we were getting it. So this map shows some of these surrounding properties. Here's the new sanctuary at Red Run in this purple circle. Down here is Wolf Swamp, the old Nature Conservancy property. There's a stream, Red Run, which connects the two, and then Red Run continues north up into Pennsylvania, becomes a tributary of, don't remember which river. Anyway, it's part of the Mississippi River drainage. It goes west from there. And then Carrie Run Sanctuary is over here. Finzel Swamp is up in this vicinity. So it's a really ecologically rich neighborhood that our new sanctuary lives in. Here's an overhead satellite image of the property showing the boundaries. There is a public road here along the east, another it's really a private road, but we have access to it, that runs along the west border of the property. There's a trail that comes in from the road. There's parking along the road. And here is the Red Run Creek, and you can see the adjacent marsh, which is really peat bog. surrounding this stream. These are photos that Dominic took during his visit in, I think it was August. Is that right? August.
We're not there in May, I believe.
Oh, okay. Anyway, shows some ferns in the understory, woodland, and then here's the marsh surrounding the freshwater creek. Some more views. Here's the trail that goes in from the road. We believe that this is a deer hunter built trail, and we do need to get a handle on deer hunting out there. So Jane Robbins, we asked Jane Robbins to write something about why the Robbins family was donating this land to MOS, and this is what she wrote. The hemlock and white pine, Jane Robbins is Chandler Robbins' daughter, one of 2 daughters and 2 sons. The hemlock and white pine, oaks and maples continue to support black-throated blues and greens, Canadas, prothonotarias, magnolias, even an occasional Nashville warbler. My parents would both be thrilled to know the land will continue hosting its richly varied flora and fauna, as well as delighting with its treasures, birders, new and seasoned. So our new map of the MOS sanctuaries includes the Robbins Sanctuary at Red Run, and we now have 2,281 acres preserved across the state. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dominic, who's going to say some words about activities of the Sanctuary Committee and ways you can help.
Thank you, Marcia.
So I'm going to run through some things really quickly. I know we're getting on in the day. If you have questions, I encourage you to hold them to the end, and we'll see if we can get Marcia to stick around to answer those, because she is a wealth of knowledge and just a treasure to work with. You know, it's really nice having you, and it's been great. I've learned a lot. I have been in this position for less than a year, and really are cooking with gas and getting a lot done, and we hope to accomplish some more things that we'll talk about now. So some opportunities at the sanctuaries. Sure, you can go there and do some casual birding, take a look around, but our sanctuaries are really for conservation of birds and the habitats that they need and they use. You know, in this ever-developing world, we really do need to set aside these properties for them. So we need to take care of what we have, and we need to actively manage what we have, and as Marcia mentioned, not just set them aside to become overgrown. We would encourage people to go out there, get their bird clubs to have some group outings. You can do some scientific research, especially if there are some streams. You can go through and look for more than just birds. Any educational projects, of course, bringing the kids out there and getting them in touch with nature. So I will read Chan's words. Sowing the seeds of conservation so that more of Maryland's citizens will learn to appreciate the natural areas of our state, and in turn help to preserve more of these areas for the enjoyment of future generations. That's really what our sanctuaries are about. They're for the birds, yes, they're also for us to get out there and enjoy these things. So some of the challenges are that, as you can see from the map that Marcia laid out, the sanctuaries are located in less populated areas, especially in western Maryland. When you start talking about Caroline Wilson, it's really difficult to convince somebody who lives in, say, Somerset County to go all the way out west and visit those properties. That's something we're trying to do, is really increase the popularity of these places by showing pictures, videos, different things that we'll talk about later, to hopefully draw some more people out there. It can be difficult to get to. Sure, the winter months make it difficult. As she mentioned, parking is also a challenge at a couple of them, but those are, you know, to the extent that we can, issues that we are trying to resolve. So we don't have a lot of people available for frequent visits. A lot of the communities out there are moving out or aging or getting away from bird clubs entirely. So we do need people to kind of take over and look at these places from time to time. You know, the Sanctuary Committee is actually pretty small, working with about 11 members right now. It's tough for all of us to get out there and take a look at these things. So I will introduce to you a little initiative we're taking to help with that. Human and financial resources are of course limited, and we talked about the financial resources recently. We made our plea, so please do keep us in mind as the holiday season comes up. If you want to donate in somebody's name, that'd be wonderful. The buildings are very expensive to maintain because they are old. They take a lot of work just to keep in the condition they are, let alone any sort of major improvements that we want to do. We've got a lot accomplished at Irish Grove this last go around, and we hope to accomplish more in the spring. But that takes money and it takes a lot of effort. So a lack of baseline biological data. Well, Mill Creek you saw. We have expansive data on that, but all the others, much less so. And we don't have anything really past 1980s when Jan did his exploration out there. So we're working on that by working with DNR and a couple of volunteers to go out and do some assessments of our sanctuaries. Starting next year, we're going to really get a handle on what we have out there. We're going to perform some bio blitzes and go out and take a look at what we have so we know how to best protect it. Vandalism is occasionally an issue, thankfully not as much as it used to be, it seems. Hunting, however, and dumping. Dumping is a major problem on the Eastern Shore, I've noticed especially. I went over to Pilo recently, Myrtle Simon Pilo Sanctuary, and I've fallen in love with that sanctuary. However, I've run out of trash bags, and I need to get some more to haul everything out of there. And there are tires and all sorts of things just on the side of the road.
It's like a party area.
It is a party area. So that's unfortunate. Kind of ties back to the need for more involvement from Bird Club members to go out there and just take a look on occasion. You know, if there's a presence out there, people are less likely to drive by and dump something off if they've seen somebody out there recently. So here's some of the questions that we're facing as a committee. How can we gain the resources to best manage the sanctuaries? Should we acquire more, or should we divest some of what we have? You've noticed that they vary greatly in size and in benefit to birds, for sure. Irish Grove obviously has a little bit more to offer than, say, our 8-acre Mandaris Creek. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing to offer there. So that's something that we're kicking around, trying to do what's best, and the assessments are going to help with that as well. Should the existing buildings be removed? That's something we've talked about for a long time, far longer than I've been part of the society. It's something that we're going to have to address in the future because they just don't stand forever, no matter how much work you do with them. Should we acquire and manage sanctuaries only for rare, threatened, or endangered species? Or should we try to expand to any species that's going to visit the area? You know, it really goes back to the main question of why do we have these sanctuaries? So how can MOS gain better knowledge of the birds and fauna and habitat so that we can properly manage them? Well, again, that goes back to the assessments, and it goes back to all of you going out there and taking pictures, taking a look at the place, getting to know it, and then, you know, sending us an email to let us know what you found. So, again, talking about it, get to know them. You can go there, and that's probably the best way to get to know your sanctuaries. But if you want to stay home, it's a cold day or something, you want to look from your computer while the fire's going, go to the videos on our YouTube channel, and Danilee's going to help me send that out to everybody. We'll have a nice link for you to click after this meeting. You'll be able to see a lot of the videos. I don't have them all updated yet, but we have a lot of short videos that highlight the sanctuaries. So if you do visit the sanctuary, we highly encourage you to submit an eBird checklist. We want to know what's out there, and it's a great way to get more interest in the sanctuaries as well. Take photos and share them with us. You can share them on the Facebook page, which again we'll give you links to, and or you can just send them to us, and we'll take it from there. You can certainly join the committee. You know, we're always looking for more people who are interested in conservation work with our sanctuaries. A wide variety of talents is needed. We've discovered lately the need for lawyers and real estate agents, etc. And really, we could use all the help we could get. And if you don't want to have the full-time commitment of being part of the committee, by all means, please participate in the work days. We have sanctuaries that need work days twice a year, like Irish Grove, and then others that really you can go out every couple of years, do some major work, and it can probably stay good for a while. But we're going to have more information on that pretty soon here, because I'd like to expand what we do, you know, not just pay attention to Irish Grove and Cary Run, but really include the others in there as well. So the Sanctuary Stewardship Program, I apologize that I didn't have that up for you when you first came in, but as you walk out, you'll see on the table, if Diane lets them hang out there for a little while. Yeah, that's the one. I've got this sheet here. So it's a fancy name for a program that we devised. It's essentially just to get people out there. If you want to become a sanctuary steward because you live near a sanctuary, or you travel to work near a sanctuary, or you go visit your best friend 3 times a year who happens to live out near a sanctuary, we would love for you to be the sanctuary steward and drop by the sanctuary as often as you'd like. Check in on it. Make sure that there's no vandalism. Report any sort of issues to me. Pick up any trash while you're there, and by all means, bird. Let us know what's out there. It's something that would be really helpful to us, and it doesn't mean you have to be in the committee and get in on all the emails and attend the meetings and all that kind of stuff. We really just need some help out at our sanctuaries. So the eBird Challenge. Now you've heard about all the work and all the things we need you to do. Well, here's some of the fun stuff. Marcia came up with this eBird Challenge for 2018, and we have 10 MOS sanctuaries that will hopefully be official by that time. We're really making a lot of progress with the Robbins property, and I have hope that by the end of the year we'll have officially 10. So in order to participate, you just need to visit at least once all of our sanctuaries and submit at least one eBird checklist for all of them. Once you've done that, you can enter your name into a drawing for prizes at the end of the year. The prizes are to be determined, but as you can imagine, they are typically bird-centric prizes. So some other things you can do. You can lead a field trip or ask your bird club to do so. You can join a team conducting biological assessments if you can happen to find one. We are, like I said, going to have the assessments out there, and as soon as we get more information on how those are being led, if you wish to participate, let us know, and we can certainly send you out there with the crew. Help us publicize. So you can write an article in the Yellow Throat or local chapter magazines, or you can send scientific articles if you have enough information. By all means, the more exposure we can get, the more donations we can get, and maybe the more help on work days. If you feel so inclined to create a trail map, you can do that. You can do the research if you would like to have access to the many binders of information that I have from over the years. By all means, let me know. Post photos to the Facebook or Instagram and more. We'll have more information on that if you have the link that we'll send out to you for the Facebook page. So if you want to do more than just participate by donating, you can hold a fundraiser for us. If there's something that you're good at, for instance, a craft fair, which is one avenue that we're exploring, by all means, you could hold that and have the proceeds go to the Sanctuary Fund. You can donate directly, or you can use the GoFundMe site, which we'll send to you. It's a great site. It allows us to keep track of who you are. It does eat into the cost a little bit because they take a percentage because they're a business, but every little bit helps, and it's a great, easy way to do it. As you saw, and as Marcia mentioned, the Sanctuary Fund donation form came out, and we do have some of those if you want to take those. So we're going to hold a raffle, and we're putting together the information about this. I won't mention who, but we are getting some pretty great donations for the raffle at the MOS conference, and I would definitely keep your ears and eyes open for that, because that's going to be pretty spectacular. My wife and craft expert, Liz Nusifora, is going to be helping us organize a craft fair that proceeds can go to us. And of course, chapter donations. So if you have any other ideas, any suggestions, any questions, comments, concerns, you can send them to me. And if you do pick up a Sanctuary Steward form up at the front, it's got my card on it, it's got my information, you can call or email me anytime. And we'd be glad to answer your questions or help any way we can.